So I just want to say good morning and welcome, or good evening as the case may be. Welcome to this 4-part webinar series on strategic planning for 2021. How are you all today? I am looking forward to taking you through this process. So today is the first of a 4-event series, and the event today is titled The Number One Killer of Strategic Planning. And then from there, we're actually going to be running events every Tuesday morning at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time over the next 4 weeks. So we want you to be able to lock that into your diaries. And during those 4 weeks, Mark and Eric are going to be discussing the 4-step planning cycle. And then they're going to talk you through your plan and how to execute it. Plus, they're going to assist you in bringing your plan to life. So I'll put that link in the chat box so that you can register for these additional events as well. And before I actually formally introduce you to today's hosts, I'm just going to go through a little bit of quick housekeeping. So firstly, we are actually recording this session, so we'll make a copy available to you so that you can rewatch and review. In addition to this as well, we also will have a copy of the pitch deck emailed out to you as well. I think initially when you came in, I did actually have you on mute. So you can unmute yourself and mute yourself, but we would like you to keep yourself muted just to keep the background noise to a minimum if you're not actually speaking. We've also activated the chat feature. So we encourage you to put your questions in the chat feature just so you can remember what they are, and we'll make sure that we actually address all of those as well. Plus, we've got the emojis happening down the bottom as well on your toolbar, so you can give Mark and Eric a thumbs up or a clap for some of the content that they're talking about today in response to their sort of questions and answers. Now, I'm sure that you're all also very familiar with how Zoom works, but I just wanted to mention to you that the best viewing mode for today's presentation is actually in gallery view. And probably most exciting of all today is I'm going to be randomly giving away a winner of Mark Jones' new book titled The Power of Mentorship. And I'm going to be doing that via my magic spinning wheel, which will happen later in the event. So thank you. Okay, so let's just move on. So I just want to say I'm really thrilled today to be able to introduce you to today's hosts, Eric Ryan and Mark Jones. Eric Ryan is a co-founder and principal of MissionMet, LLC, a US-based firm that provides strategic planning services and software to small non-profits and organisations. In addition to his consulting work, he has started a non-profit, been an executive director, and served on several boards as a board chair. He's writing a book about strategic planning to support the growth and sustainability of organisations working in the non-profit sector. Welcome, Eric. Now I'm going to introduce you to Mark Jones. Mark is the co-founder and partner of Genac Business Solutions, which is based in Lake Macquarie, New South Wales. And Mark maintains a highly engaged clientele across Australia, inclusive of industry associations, not-for-profit charitable organisations, corporate and SMEs. He's the co-author of the Australian Small Business Mentoring Handbook and The Power of Mentorship text, which was published in late September this year. Mark's expertise is in the area of strategic planning, strategy execution, peak performance, and mentoring. So as you can see, we're in great hands here. Eric and Mark, the then co-founder and MD of Track Consulting Queensland, first met in 2004 and have worked on several projects collaborative together across the Asia Pacific region with a focus on strategy and change implementation, organisational development, and team effectiveness since that time. We welcome you both, and I'm going to hand it over to you now, Mark.
Oh, very well. Look, thanks, Sarah Jane. Thanks for the great introduction, very humbling. So I'm sure that Eric feels the same, and yeah, it's up to us now to live up to those expectations. So good on you, and thanks. But look, welcome everybody. This is going to be what I hope is an insightful series. I've been very fortunate to have worked with Eric for quite some time now on various different projects, and some of his other colleagues. We first started working with an organisation, or collaborated with an organisation called Best Year Yet back in about 2004, 2005. And had some immediate synergies, and so let's look at opportunities of working together. And we're revisiting that now. We had a bit of a hiatus there for a while, but we've refounded each other by default and through some of our mutual contacts. And I said, Eric, we really need to be sharing all of this stuff we've been doing in the strategic planning space, which we've been doing now for quite a few years, and it has evolved. Eric's been instrumental in that evolution in terms of software development, and he does have a focus with the small business, the small not-for-profit sector, where I've taken his tools and found that they have great application across a whole range of sectors and different client bases. And certainly am enjoying here in the Australasian market now a lot of success with corporates and particularly industry associations. And there's a couple of not-for-profits, and one I'm going to highlight a bit later in our webinar today, just to give you some insights into how they've transformed that business over the last 12 months. And in particular, the metrics that they've used to guide their individual and team and business effectiveness in terms of hitting those strategic objectives. So without too much further ado, we'll sort of get into the nuts and bolts of the program. So Eric, this is going to be very conversational today, almost, if I can say, like a lounge discussion. So for all of you participants, we want you to be part of that process as well. So I'd really love for you, if you've got any questions, to engage with us through the chat. Sarah Jane will moderate those questions, and certainly we will try and answer as many of your questions as we possibly can throughout the process. And there will be a formal Q&A section just at the back end, just to tidy up any loose ends, just to close out the session. So without too much further ado, let's talk about the 4-part webinar series. I'll hand it over to Eric and he can give you some insights.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. And Mark's right, and Sarah Jane said this too. Our focus in my business is on small nonprofit organizations. That said, I've worked with many businesses, government agencies, and so on. We just happen to have a focus on the small nonprofits. If you are not in a small nonprofit, all of the principles that we're going to be talking about, and Mark's experience in particular, will absolutely apply to other sectors. So as you see here on the screen, Mark and I have set up a 4-part webinar series. And we've really given a lot of thought about what's going to be the best value for you. And so this first one today is the #1 killer of strategic planning. So we wanted to have you walk out of here having a better understanding of the pitfalls, the challenges that Mark and I have seen, and perhaps you've experienced with strategic planning. And we wanted to start with this first, because if you have a better understanding of this, then it's the type of thing that you can hopefully avoid. Strategic planning, when it's done well, can bring, increase your profits, align your team, all the different promises. When it's done poorly, it can really suck. It can really be a time suck. It can cost you too much money. It can hurt your leadership and so on. And so starting with this understanding, so Mark and I wanted to just call it out, like these are some of the challenges that people have. Moving into the next webinar, we then want to give you a foundation around a 4-part cycle. As we'll get into this, one of our core components that we hope you get out of this is the concept of strategic planning not being an event, but it's actually an ongoing, never-ending cycle. And so we're going to give you our four-step cycle that we use, and give you some of the details behind that so that you can sort of create a structure for planning at your organization. Moving into the 3rd webinar, we'll actually present you with a format for a plan, best planning practices, how you can engage your team in that process, and we'll wrap up at the end with webinar #4, where we're talking all about execution. As you'll see when we talk about the 4-step planning cycle, the execution of the plan. In fact, there's a book back here behind me. I'm always doing this. There's a book back here called Execution is the Strategy, and I can't find it, but behind me, I often pull it off. Here it is. It was on my desk. I didn't realize it. Execution is the strategy. And so often, especially in smaller organizations, people create a plan and then it doesn't get executed. So that's going to be what the 4th webinar is all about. So over the course of time, you're going to get lots of resources, lots of ideas, and practical items. And hopefully in some discussion, we'll get some ideas from all of you too that will help everybody. So Mark?
Okay, thanks, Eric. And I guess just building on that, the objective of these 4 weeks is for you to actually be more centered, more focused, have clarity about some of your organization's challenges, and build a strategic framework that will enable you to realize and to capitalize on the strategic objectives. It's one thing to have a strategic plan, it's another thing to bring it to life, and we'll certainly discuss it in some detail. So here's not so much a rhetorical question. I'd really love to engage in the chat if we can, or if anyone would love to unmute and certainly share their experiences. But we want to hear from you, what you believe are some of the real challenges to strategic planning that either your organisation has had to endure or you've experienced. So let's see what we come up with. Sarah Jane can moderate any chat text that comes up if you like. I'll open the chat window and have a bit of a look. But certainly if anyone would like to share some of the experiences, we'd really love to hear from you. What have been some of your challenges? What have been some of the roadblocks to the achievement and closing out of your strategic objectives? Looks like we might be all a little bit gun shy. And these don't have to be long-winded answers. Certainly love people to talk to it if they can. From Annabelle. Okay, so would you like to unmute Annabelle and maybe share on this a little bit more? It says here, I'm a landscape architect working on policy in a volunteer basis for an industry organisation, currently reviewing strategy. The policy is the strategy as far as I can see.
Sorry, that's rather convoluted, but I'm able to benefit from this conference today by understanding what the strategy can do, because as far as I can see, it is so critical to everything the organisation is, and separating out the strategy from the organisation and the policy from the organisation. It sort of seems to highlight the fact that the organisation, its main role is strategic. So how we can best manage strategy, I think, is core to everything we do. So I'm really interested to just listen to what's happening today and see how I can apply that. So looking at the policy that we're creating for the organisation, it's actually the Institute of Landscape Architects, and it's not published yet, so I can't really give too much away, but it's a very sort of overarching piece of policy that will hopefully guide the whole organisation. And so I see it very much as strategy. And at the same time, there's a strategic process going on. So I've been trying to dovetail the policy with the strategy, and it's highlighted some of the disconnects in the organisation, which we're smoothing out now, and we're actually getting some real traction. And it's a really healthy, positive process, but rather convoluted. If I'm trying to explain it like that, it's policy, it's strategy, and the general running of the industry organisation.
Okay, very good. Thanks for that. It's interesting, the word that keeps resonating with me in terms of linking strategy and policy, and that is somewhat a simple term, and we like to use simple language in our strategic planning documentation, because sometimes we just make it too complex. And I see a strategic plan as really a roadmap. And like any tour or trip or holiday, if it's planned effectively, people will really have a greater experience. And I always say that we need to start with the end in mind. So what is it we're really trying to achieve through this strategy? And what is in terms of policy, what's the framework, the rigor around compliance, around policy, around industry engagement in your context, being an industry organisation? What are the action items that we need to undertake, the means to an end to complete that road trip safely, if you like, to be able to navigate that journey and close out on those objectives that we're working towards along the way. So I hope that helps. Jamie Palmer, you've said here uncertainty due to COVID and border closures. So would you like to expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I'm from Queensland in Australia. My business I run migration and also student recruitment. So I contract out to some large universities here in Australia. And because of COVID and because of the borders shut, there's a lot of uncertainty for migrants and international students because they don't know when Australia's going to open the borders. Where Canada and the UK have kind of, starting to open up. So my strategic focus is a little bit uncertain right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. COVID has created a lot of VUCA, if you've heard of that term before, VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity. And really a good, clear strategic plan can help to overcome those VUCA situations or issues. Yep. So when we do have that ambiguity and uncertainty, we quite often have to look for diversity of direction. We need to look for plan Bs, if you like, contingency plans, and a good structured strategic plan will also have a component of risk management embedded into it. Yep. Certainly from a decision-making perspective, there's a tool that I'll probably make reference to in later webinars called the Consequences Wheel, in terms of helping us to make more informed decisions that will guide the structure and direction of the strategic plan.
Excellent.
So hopefully that will be of help to you as well. Yep. Anybody else like to share anything? Because I really want to make sure that we're capturing this information as well, so that we can make sure that the coming webinars are going to be really relevant and help to address some of these issues that you're experiencing right now.
This is helpful to hear what people's concerns are. Pete said in the chat box right above Jamie, today's comfort, Mark. Today's comfort.
Yes, what do you mean by that, Peter? I know you well, Peter Trim, so interested to hear what you got. How are you, buddy?
Good. I guess one of the things has been interesting because real sense of uncertainty at the beginning of the year, but the organisation was agile enough to come through reasonably unscathed, to this point at least. And so what's happened is in a lot of areas, there's that we can just continue doing what we've always done. Mm-hmm. And so the impetus for change or for strategic planning is not in play. Staff are comfortable with that in their roles, want to stay in their roles the way they've always done them, and looking and going, well, we've survived thus far, we'll probably do the rest fine as well. And so the impetus that started with COVID is now starting to almost work against us from a strategic perspective, because staff are going, well, we did okay just doing what we've done from their perspective. Mm-hmm. And they're not foreseeing what could happen over the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, it's interesting that strategic planning is really a visioning exercise, if I can use it as a general term. One of the organisations that I will showcase some of their work today is a not-for-profit organisation that works in the disability support sector in terms of education. And they had to pivot quite significantly due to the fact that a lot of their programs were impacted by personal contact and social distancing and just all these small issues where if you have, and for those that are aware and work in that disability support sector, particularly when you've got people with high needs, it's a really close contact work. So their existing delivery models almost became obsolete straight away. And they had to pivot quite significantly in terms of their service delivery, the services they do deliver. And it's interesting that when you look at, and we will showcase them in a case study later in the webinar, but they have actually closed out on about, I think it's an average of 89 to 90% of their strategic objectives for 2020 in this COVID environment. And they're so excited about 2021. I was actually talking to their CEO this morning. We had an executive team meeting yesterday done by Skype yesterday afternoon. And they're so excited about closing out 2020 now because they've achieved so much and really having another strategic focus for 2021 in terms of the platforms and the tools that we've been working with. And we'll explain them in more detail a little later. But certainly the Mission MET framework, which is a tool that Eric has designed, has been key and catalyst to that performance this year. So we'll give you some insights into that a little later. So look, that's interesting. Let's close out the chat and let's look from our perspective. If you can just click on the video for us, Sarah Jane, what we believe to be some of the issues that I guess derail the strategic planning process.
So I've got a question for you. What do you think is the single biggest problem with strategic planning at small nonprofits? Put another way, what's the number one killer? The number one killer of strategic planning at small nonprofit organizations? Oh shoot. Number one killer of videos is a phone ringing. Hold on, let me get this real quick, hold on. Yeah, hey Sylvia. Yeah, no, I'm busy, sorry, but yeah, okay, I can take a second, sure. Yeah, okay. All right, I'll do what I can. I'll see if I can find it. I'll call you back in a little bit, but let me see if I can find it for you. Okay, see you, and talk to you soon, maybe see you tonight. Okay, bye. All right, that was weird. That was really weird. Sylvia is the chair of a board of a local organization. I'm on the board also, and I have all the records for the organization. And we have a board meeting tonight, and she wants me to bring our old strategic plan. And I think we have it in, I have it in the closet in the file cabinet, but I'm not sure. And so while this is still fresh in my mind, give me a second. I got to go find it, and then we'll come back to this in a minute. Okay, bye. Is that plan? That's not there. I think it's probably buried in here. It's kind of crazy. Frying pan and a baseball glove, just what you need in your closet. All right, let's see here. Oh, there it is down there. Okay, good. There we go. There it is. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little skit. It was a lot of fun to make. And we made that for you to demonstrate a really important idea, and that is that the number one killer of strategic planning at small nonprofits is poor execution. People create plans all the time. I hear it all the time where people have created a 5-year strategic plan and they stick it on a shelf or put it in a file cabinet and it is never seen from again. So that's real common, and it's really unfortunate because you put all this time and energy into creating a plan, you want to use it. So why is that? Why does that happen? Well, in our next video, we're going to explain the reasons that lead to poor execution of strategic plans.
Okay, so Eric, let's explore that a little bit further in terms of some of the other elements. So what do you think? What do you got?
So as we go through, first of all, it's a little weird to watch yourself on a video from a few years ago. So that was weird before I had facial hair too. So that was a strange experience to watch that. What we've learned, and Mark and I have talked about this, regardless of the organization, whether it's a business, a small business, a small nonprofit, it's exceedingly common for leaders to spend time and energy creating a strategic plan. And it's also, unfortunately, exceedingly common to see that plan, as we showed in that video, collect dust. People are busy. People have a lot on their plate. And we'll talk about some reasons why here as we go through some of these other slides. But what Mark and I have re-engineered essentially is an approach to, if that in fact is the biggest issue, and you may disagree that that's the biggest issue. What we found, however, is that tends to be the biggest issue where people create plans, but they don't have systems in place to support it. Then what can we do differently about that? And so we've engineered our consulting and our work to help people not only create an excellent plan, but to build the muscle of their team so that it will support it over time. And that's going to be a main theme of what we talk about over the next 3 webinars after today too. So we'll be getting into more of the solutions about that. But there's some causes, there's some key reasons why those plans tend to collect dust. And so Mark, let's go ahead and keep going through these slides and share some, again, as I said at the beginning, this presentation today and discussion really is about some of those challenges. So you get more aware so that you're prepared to, and as we learn what we have to share in the next 3 webinars, you'll be able to put some strategies in place to overcome it. So Mark?
Okay, so look, what I'd like to do is certainly create some context initially. And there is a lot of anecdotal evidence and there's a lot of research being done, in particular by the Harvard Business Review and Harvard Business College. And they actually followed a group of organizations. It was an eclectic mix of growth companies, growth SMEs, not-for-profit organizations, Fortune 500 organizations. And what they found is that over a 10-year period, the collective group only achieved 57% of their strategic objectives. And when you think of all the time and effort that goes into strategic planning, and you're only closing out 57% of those goals, if you want to call them goals in the simplest context, that's a pretty poor performance. If that was my business, or if I was the coach of the sporting team and we're only having a 57% track record of success, I don't know that I'd be too happy. And it's interesting, Mark Cowan, one of our attendees today, I just caught up in his text there in the chat room. He says, SMEs don't do it. And that's so true. But it's not just strategic planning. It could be as simple as just having a business plan or having an agreed vision for the small business between the stakeholders and partners. It could be just having some simple goals. If we strip it down to its basic shell, a lot of them don't even do that, which can be quite, saying, well, how do they survive? How have some of these businesses managed to grow and be sustainable? And are they winging it? And I guess that may be the case. So let's go to the next slide then and look at some reasons which we have identified that are the sort of things that are inhibitors to effective execution of strategic planning. And the first one is that leaders get distracted by the urgent. So what do we mean by that? And it's interesting, even with the CEO that I was talking to only a couple of hours ago from that not-for-profit that I was talking about, I asked Michelle, I said, you're doing a lot of grant and fund writing and submissions and things at the moment. I said, how many you got on the go? And she's got about 12 or 13. And I know for a fact that she, as the CEO, is very hands-on. Her and her operations manager are doing pretty much all of that work. So how much time is that taking away from the other activities that are required of them in those key positions within the organization? So this is a big one, the one at the top, beating a grant deadline. And I said, if you're doing 13 of these concurrently, wow, how do you sleep at night? And then answering the board's request. They had a board meeting just on Wednesday. So our meeting yesterday was in fact a debrief of the board meeting, just to summarize the outputs of that and what was approved. Managing staff emergencies. Well, they've had to pivot quite a lot this year in respect to COVID-19 and how they've adapted to a changing landscape. So I know they've been extremely busy, but they've been very productive. They've been extremely profitable in terms of the fact that they have had to pivot, had to change a lot of process, i.e. policies and procedures, to enable them to pivot effectively whilst maintaining a safe workplace environment, particularly dealing with people with disabilities. There's a big element of care there. And these people are always planning the next event or programs. You know, they have development teams. They've got quite a substantial footprint in terms of bespoke solutions for those people in particular need with learning disability. And then they're obviously got their day-to-day operational things to do. And then there's also these conflicting operational priorities in terms of now part of our strategic objectives is looking, well, we're outgrowing our current physical footprint. We've got to look for other opportunities or other buildings and other resources. So there's all this stuff going on. And you combine all these and think, well, hey, we've only got, say, the average workday is probably about somewhere between 8.5 and 10 hours for most people. So let's say 50 hours a week. And I know for a fact some of these people are working more than that. And that's not sustainable either. So let's look at the next slide then. The second reason is that we make our strategic plans too complex. And
so,
you want to talk to that, Eric?
Yeah, sure. And so the you know, as Mark was just saying on this last set, is when you are, all of you here are leaders on your teams, and when you have so many things that are urgently on your plate, it's hard to do the strategic work sometimes. Like you have the fires you're trying to put out. So that's a key reason. And then you lose momentum, right? As a leader, like, well, here's a strategic plan. I haven't been paying attention to it. I'm going to keep going. Well, here's a strategic plan. I really haven't been paying attention to it. And so it starts to collect dust. This second reason here around strategic plans being too complex. You can advance the slide, Sarah Jane. So there's a organization that is highlighted here that, so I came across this particular organization about 13 years or so ago, and they had a 40-page strategic plan. There were 11 different strategies. It was drop dead gorgeous. It was spiral bound, had beautiful pictures on it and so on. It was designed to create some appeal for some funders. It was a nonprofit organization. But this organization had a $25,000 annual budget in American dollars and one very, very part-time staff member. And 70 people were engaged in the creation of this plan over a period of 3 or 4 months. It was ridiculous. It was actually kind of criminal because they had a fantastic mission, but I tracked them over time, and this organization never went anywhere. It never grew, it never changed, it never hit their mission more effectively. And I would argue that that strategic planning process was just extremely too overwhelming for them and distracted them. And that's one of those problems where the complexity and created, I'm not going to touch the strategic plan, it's too much going on. There's a book on my shelf here by a consultant that Mark and I both enjoy. His name's Pat Lencioni. And he's working with, the largest of the largest organizations. And in those organizations, they create 1 point per quarter. Like, here's our thing we're working on right now. Then we're going to work on this one. Maybe it's 6 months. Just simple, focused approach helps to make sure that the plans don't collect dust. So, Mark, why don't you address this here?
Okay, and just to continue on from what you're just saying, Eric, and it ties into this particular slide very well. In that, if we have a window of, say, 12 months, maybe 2 years, at an absolute maximum, 3 years for a strategic plan, and I'll put that in context for our American participants today. Typically, a federal government tenure here in Australia is a 3-year term. So policy and political priorities and budgetary considerations can change quite abruptly. So a 3-year planning cycle here in Australia is something I highly recommend, because we don't have a crystal ball. Quite often it's very difficult to look beyond that next term of government. But what I always say to people is to start with the end in mind. So we're going to talk through shortly in this case study about this not-for-profit in South Australia. And when I did the first strategic planning session with them in February of this year, late January, it was the first week of February, in fact, we started the planning process in terms of logistics and how it's going to work in January. And I asked people to put forward their ideas in respect to some strategic priorities for 2020. And this is an executive team and a CEO of one CEO and the 5 executives, so 6 people. And they came back with 21 strategic objectives. And my first response was, oh my goodness, we really need to strip this back. What are the really critical metrics that we need to identify that will enable this organisation to say, we've had an amazing year. This has been our best year ever. Because there's no way in the world they could have accomplished all 21. And you will see from their strategic framework, when we show it to you a little bit later today, we strip that back down to 4 focus areas and about 9 goals, means goals, to turn those 4 focus objectives into reality. So I always say start with the end in mind. And what I mean by that is, what can we realistically achieve in this timeline? So the short-term horizon, the next 6 to 12 months. Because we can somewhat control the next 6 to 12 months without worrying too much about politics, external influences, COVIDs and all sorts of things. We can make some pretty clear plans, knowing what we know about our current environment, that we could or would enable us to really drill down and focus on those 4 or 5 things. A midterm horizon is generally a 1 to 2 year period, and what we call a longer term horizon, 2 to 3 years. And that's interesting because I've done a lot of work with Olympic athletes over the years in peak performance sport. And sometimes we're talking 1 or 2 Olympiads in terms of their development and progress as an athlete. That could be 4 to 8 years, but we always start with the end in mind. And the end goal there was to be on the dais, getting a medal or whatever period of time in the future. And then we worked backwards from there and broke it down into bite-sized chunks, actionable tasks and objectives and goals for different types of competitions along the way. And strategic planning in business is really no different. We need to start with the end in mind and identify what it is that's really important. What are our focus goals and what are we working towards? So I think that explains that slide well enough. Next one, please, Sarah.
So the third reason here, so these are the 3 reasons that we're going to share with you that we feel like really lead to plans collecting dust. 1, leaders are stretched. They have too many different things on their plate. This particular item here is about a mindset about strategic planning being viewed as an event. So you can go to this little graph on the next page, Sarah Jane. On this graph, you'll see the concept here that, let's say that you approach strategic planning as an event. You get your team together, you go off and do a retreat, and it's highlighted there on the left-hand side. You have an event, and that orange bar shows like we're making our, everyone's psyched. They're excited, they're happy. They're seeing some momentum with the organization. But if your perspective is that you created a plan as opposed to creating a process that will sustain you over time, then that plan will more likely be the type of thing that's going to collect dust. And you won't be getting the return on that planning process. And so that it can actually impact you. It can actually impact you in a negative way. And that's where the orange bar drops below the horizontal there, where there's a loss of time and money, the mission's not being met, disillusionment. It can hurt everyone's perspective of you as a leader. So those 3 items on the left are the reasons why we feel like are some core reasons. We could create a much longer list, but those are some core items. And then Mark, why don't you go ahead and share the solutions there on the right-hand column, the sort of the inverse.
Okay, thanks, Eric. So look, part of the conversation and the mindset that we adapt with our clients is that strategic planning needs to be something that they, as key leaders and managers in they're responsible for, are not only accountable for, but become the champions of. We need to build a culture that strives towards continuous improvement, a culture that maximizes and supports people in achieving individual effectiveness, team effectiveness, organizational effectiveness, and build upon the capacity of all of those people to have a sense of contribution to the outcomes that the business or the organization are achieving. People will support what they themselves create. So the premise here is to engage as many people as possible within the strategic planning process. That could be from the janitor to the front office receptionist through to the CEO. The more people we get behind the strategic planning process and it becomes part of their role, they have a sense of ownership and contribution, the more effective your plan is going to be. Keep it simple. Create a 1 or 2 page plan. And that's built on the premise again that structure produces behavior. We don't need reams and reams of paper in a document to tell us what our strategic objectives are and how we're going to get there. Simplified 1 or 2 page plans will suffice, particularly if they're embedded into an adaptive, intuitive platform, which is what we're going to be sharing with you as part of the Mission Met process. Approach strategic planning as an ongoing cycle. So I check in with all of my clients, even if it's only a 5 or a 10-minute phone call, once a month. Sometimes it's more in depth than that in terms of some of the CEOs and the operations managers I work with. And sometimes I do face-to-face with clients on a monthly basis to keep everything on the agenda, to make sure that we're progressing on all the key goals and objectives that are set within the organization. But again, we keep the model simple. And then we'll talk about the Mission Met platform as an intuitive type of software to support that process in the coming webinars. We'll highlight a little bit of that today to give you some insights to what it may look like. But that's not the reason we're here. Personally, I think there's so many of these types of platforms out there. It's getting the one that's the right fit for you and your organization. So let's continue on with the slides. So what we'd like to know from yourselves, can you share an example of strategic planning that has worked well? We talked before about the pitfalls and some of the challenges. We'd like to hear from the group very quickly about some of the real successes, but more importantly, what were some of the key actions or behaviors, the psychology behind that success?
Yeah, I'll give you one, Eric. Simone here. I think one of the things that really stalled a lot of my strategic planning in areas was ego in upper management. You would definitely have great ideas, great systems and processes to follow, but you'd just come across that blocker with the management level not actually wanting to acknowledge that those people, especially frontline, not engaging, like the comment I just put up, not engaging frontline staff that are actually the ones implementing those processes and systems, and have really good insight into, especially where customer-centric mindset is involved as well. They would know the customer the best, and they weren't given an avenue to have that feedback and to put their knowledge into those processes and systems. So I think one of the things that I learned best through my experience as a manager was to engage everyone, as you say, but learn how to listen and not feel that you know everything, that you can always learn something from somebody.
That's a good feedback. It's interesting. Peter Trim, I know you're with us today, but Peter has worked with myself with quite a few clients over the years, and I think he would give testament to the fact that I almost make it a mandatory requirement with all my clients that we engage people from the very front door to the top of the boardroom. Now, if we really want to get stakeholder engagement, if we want to improve morale, esprit de corps, team spirit, if we want to get people to be focused and motivated and achieving the organization's objectives, we need to give them a sense of ownership. Then and only then will we close out on our strategic objectives.
There's a quote that you shared earlier, Mark, that our colleague Scott Winter and friend uses a lot, and you reference it, that people support that which they create.
Yes.
And it's interesting because you as a leader, if you involve everyone and you get everyone in, it can take an awful lot of time. So you got to find in the strategic planning process, the science is you want engagement. The art is trying to figure out exactly to what degree you want to engage the people and how far in the organization. So it is a balance you're trying to find, and it varies from organization, it varies from organizational culture. But the basic ethic, and Simone is essentially saying this, and Mark, you were saying this too, that the degree, if you can engage the deeper organization in your process, then it is more likely that the plan itself will be sustained and followed, for sure.
It's interesting. I often use the analogy of people that have teenage children or young adolescent males in particular, because quite often as a parent, you think you're giving them good wisdom and sage advice, but quite often, regardless of what you tell them, they'll do the opposite or they'll push back. And I've seen that happen in businesses and organizations as well, particularly when it's top-down driven and it's forced upon people. So we have to somehow work out how we can turn that pyramid upside down and give that sense of ownership to the people at the bottom and let them be the champions and the advocates, you know, and the ones that are out there really supporting. They might not be driving, but at least supporting the strategic agenda of the organization.
And it is tricky. It's tricky trying to find that balance between efficiency and the depth of effectiveness. It's something that Mark and I work with, trying to find the right balance at each organization, for sure.
Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. I'm a bit cognizant of time as well. We've got about 15 minutes to go. So we will look at least one. We'll look at the employment options case study. I'm a bit wary of the time because I want to talk about the importance of metrics, and because what we can measure, we can manage, and that's it's a cliche saying. It's been around for the eons. We've all heard it before. But when I see people writing strategic objectives or goal setting, they don't really understand the importance of defined metrics in terms of what are we really working towards? What is the goal? What is the benchmark? Not just the KPI or the KRA. What is the actual metric in terms of what we're trying to achieve? So, and I think employment options do that very well. So I'm going to share my screen and bring up a plan from employment options in South Australia. And Michelle, the CEO there, was really excited at the fact that we were going to showcase her organisation today. So I thank her in advance. So when we, and we'll talk a lot about the structure and all of the framework later on. This is a top-down view. I just want to give you some oversight into why this one has been so effective. And employment options provides bespoke solutions, learning solutions in particular, with people that have some form of intellectual or physical disability. And their mission statement, or their vision statement, sorry, says it all. Everyone deserves a working future. And everything they do in that organisation drives towards that outcome. And we spent, I'm going to say, it took us 4 hours without getting into champions and the jargon of language. We'll talk about all that a bit later, particularly next week. But what I wanted to give you an idea was their framework here. And this compass, we can contextualize that to the needs or the style of organisation that we're working with, whether it's just a small little micro business or an SME with 15 to 20 employees, whether it's a not-for-profit, industry association, government agencies. You know, I've got huge organisations using this stuff. But this is what their strategic priority was for 2020. And this really came out of the whole thing when we were doing this in February. COVID hit. And what we had to, and what we just decided at that time was the current delivery model in particular, where there was high engagement, high touch, face-to-face delivery wasn't going to work in a COVID world. So we had to pivot pretty quickly. And so we put some metrics in place in terms of all the changes that were going to take place or forced upon the business in that coming 12 months. And staff.
Mark, I'm just going to jump in for a second. That gray bar keeps popping up. So scroll up a little higher on your screen, just a little bit. There now. Okay, good. There you go. Because that gray bar, it's just that funny computer thing that's happening. There, you're good now. Okay,
thank you. So they felt with all the change that was going to be implemented within the organisation, keeping the staff engaged was one of the key priority areas for the year. And they set quite an ambitious goal to try and get the 90% or better for the whole team, because you're always going to get that element of pushback and all the rest of it. So they've done a number of staff engagement surveys, and there's a lot more changes going on at Employment Options right now as we speak with regards to expanding their footprint and entering into collaborations with other partnering organisations and such forth. But they've still been able to maintain it. And I haven't got a current metric for November. They're doing another staff survey right now to close out the year. But they've been maintaining 99% and 90% all the way through the year, which is, given the year that we've had, particularly with COVID, that's quite extraordinary. Goal progress. They had a number of strategic goals that they wanted to work towards. And, you know, they set some key goals around that. And as of this, or 2 weeks ago now, the 11th, they'd achieved 86% of the goals that they'd set out to close out by the end of this financial year, the 30th of 6 next year. They set a target of 80%. They're now at 86. They're going to smash it. They will achieve everything on their strategic objectives within the next 4 weeks. That was the executive meeting we had yesterday. People were quite convinced that everything they'd set out to achieve this year, which was a number of focus areas, I'll show them in a moment, just a top-down view, that they would achieve those outcomes, and they will get close to 100%. They set out to, by the end of this year, the physical year, the 31st of the 12th, 2020, to have a cash equity in their bank of 530,000. This is a small not-for-profit. As of the 31st of October, they're at 426, and they've yet to get their next round of NDIS payments from the federal government. So we're thinking that 530 will be smashed out of the park as well. They set a goal to get the balance right between their fee-for-service revenue versus that which they get from grants and government funding. So they wanted that to be at 60% by the 31st of the 12th, 2020, and they're currently sitting 2 weeks ago at 69%. So again, they beat that benchmark metric that they set for this year. And as you can see these goals are, you know, they're things that we can measure in terms they have a date, they have a timeline. They're very specific in terms of what it is we're measuring, and the goals are very prescriptive in terms of numbers and percentage that we can measure. And you say, okay, that all sounds well and good. What is the driving principle that makes it happen is the next thing down, the paradigm statement. And this is something that they as a team created in terms of, well, you know, we're living in this VUCA environment. It's ambiguous, it's uncertain, all the rest of it. And the impacts, the social impacts, the psychological impacts on our clients are going to be paramount. So they came up with this motto, which is driving everything they do at the moment. We find a way or we create a way. And that underpins all of their actions and behaviours. And then some guiding principles, which I guess underpin the culture that they've been able to create at that organisation this year. And without getting into the nuts and bolts, these were the 4 focus areas that we came up with. Now, remember, there was, like I said before, there was quite a lot. There was way too many focus goals for this organisation to attack in 1 year. So we narrowed the focus down to 4, being sustainability, being the programs that they deliver and being innovative and creating new programs, their commercial partnerships and expanding their footprint in collaborations and looking at different funding models, and then their people and developing their people and their people's capability. That was what we narrowed it down to. And like I suggested to you before, it looks like they're going to close out on almost 100% of their objectives that they set for the year. Unprecedented. So I know that time is, you know, getting away, but I just wanted to show you like a framework, because we're now seeing that that framework has been successful, just not in the not-for-profit sector. Certainly industry associations and not-for-profits can be closely aligned. The SME sector, I'm working on some small business clients in the IT space, retail, about to do some stuff with a hairdressing chain. So this model can have application pretty much anywhere. So in moving forward, where we go to from here is that next week, we're going to start to deliver on the nuts and bolts, actually creating a framework. And I don't care what platform or software application you want to use, this framework is adaptable to pretty much anything. And you'll see on our page here, you'll get the PowerPoint presentation sent to you after the webinar today. You can use the link in this PowerPoint presentation to register for that webinar next week. And we'd love to see you all there.
Sarah Jane just put the link in the chat.
Okay, great.
Too. Yeah.
So yeah, we really want to start to put some meat on the skeleton, if we can say that, next week. We're going to give you the framework and the skeleton, and we're going to start to flush it out and build it so that by the time we get to week 4, not only will you have a strategic plan framework for your business, you'll have some clearly identified goals and objectives, but we're also going to give you the how-to to execute on that to ensure that you realize those objectives in 2021. So I think it's worthwhile staying engaged, if I can say so myself. Let's hope so. So to wrap things up, we're going to do the little wheel spin now for all of you that attended today. And I'm very pleased that we'll be giving away a copy of my recently published book. It's been quite exciting. So let's hit the button and see how we go.
Okay, fantastic. So this is a list of everyone who's actually attended today. Very random. Oh,
Hey.
and congratulations. We will actually reach out to you directly and arrange for a copy of this book to be sent to you. So congratulations.
Yes, congratulations, Andrea, and we will certainly be in touch. So looking just in closing out today, we've still got a couple of minutes left, so we thought we'd give people an opportunity to just have a quick Q&A, grab any feedback, comments, things you'd like to see embedded or discussed over the next few weeks. This is an opportunity to raise those opportunities with us right now.
So just
nobody.
Oh,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
Eric.
Go ahead, Sarah Jane.
I was just going to remind everyone that we've got the next 3 webinars. They're actually at 11 a.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time. So that's on a Tuesday. So maybe block out that sort of 11 till 12 time slot on each of those days. And I'll ensure that you receive a copy of this pitch deck as well as a copy of the recording as well, so that you can go back and reference anything. And even if you have additional questions post this webinar, you've got the contact details on the screen now as well, so you can reach out directly to Eric and Mark as well.
Look, and I also think that if you've got colleagues or other line managers back in the workplace you think may benefit from the next few weeks, invite them along, encourage them to participate as well. We'll be giving a book away every week for the next 3 weeks also. So yeah, don't put too many people in, limit the chances. But look, thank you to everyone for participating today, giving up an hour of your time. I hope you found it a useful investment, and we really look forward to guiding you over the next few weeks as we work towards getting your strategic plans structured for 2021. So if there's nothing else, I think we might call it quits. It'd be great to hang around Eric and Sarah Jane to have a quick chat when we're finished.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, cheers, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everybody.
guys. Looking forward to
Thank you
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Eric.